The final drafting of the executive order for Donald Trump is now being prepared. Cynthia Lummis confirms that. She says she's just putting on the final touches. And then Donald Trump can sign this executive order here, and the US can buy massive amounts of Bitcoin. In other words, she's preparing the final touches here, Bitcoin reserve law. Also, we now have 2 new states in the US that have also submitted strategic Bitcoin reserve laws. And indeed, we now have the Federal Reserve announcing that on the 21st January, so at the start of Donald Trump's term, to initiate extraordinary measures. We're also going to take a look at what that's all about, because there's a lot of speculation going on about this. What this could mean, whether they're buying Bitcoin here. But let's take a look at what's behind it. First, let's take a look here. Cynthia Lummis is actually putting out new developments and publishing new things every day, who are pushing a Bitcoin reserve strategy forward. She's writing here, we're working hard on it. Bringing the strategic Bitcoin reserve and comprehensive legislation for digital assets onto the timeline. Thanks for your visit. So, if you ask me, that means the executive order is being prepared here, that the bill is being prepared, that final changes are being made here, and then Donald Trump will potentially be presented with the whole thing here, and he just has to sign it here. That doesn't mean it's officially confirmed yet that the Bitcoin reserve is coming. But more and more people are working with Donald Trump. That means, in the end, Donald Trump doesn't really have to do much at all. He just has to sit down. He basically just has to sign the thing. There are so many people actively working in the Bitcoin scene. And here the Bitcoin legislation, just like the strategic Bitcoin reserve, just like various executive orders, presented here. I'm not assuming that it's included here, that gold is being sold here, because Cynthia Lummis also suggested selling gold here. I think she has put the bill or the idea on hold for now. So they probably still have that up their sleeve, but they can't do that in the first step, that they're going to sell gold here. I would be really surprised when all of a sudden it says, hey, here on the display, we're selling all our gold, we're going all in on Bitcoin and diving headfirst into Bitcoin. I don't think it's going to go that far. And then there are actually new bills here. They want to push a Bitcoin reserve forward on the state level here. And that's always what I say. If Donald Trump doesn't sign this, if there's not an executive order right away, then other states will beat him to it. So that means Donald Trump won't be the first to submit a strategic Bitcoin reserve here. But then it will be here. There are states. Here it says, breaking news. In the state of Massachusetts, Senator Peter Durant introduced a bill to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve. This is the first deep blue state in history with legislation for a strategic Bitcoin reserve. That's what I've said a few times already. That it's not just the Republicans who are all in on Bitcoin, but there are also a lot of folks in the Democratic camp. In the US here per Bitcoin. And Scaramucci mentioned in an interview that the more extreme the legislation is supposed to be, the more support you need from the other side. So that means if you just say, okay, we're just going to convert the 200,000 Bitcoin that the US has into the stockpile, then you don't need as much support. Bitcoin that the US has into the stockpile, then you don't need as much support. But if you get even bolder, if you say you want to buy your own Bitcoin here, with your own printed money, maybe then you need even more support. And what if you even go that far and says you want to sell gold here and you can buy Bitcoin? Then you just need even more political support. And that's why it's also important that the Democrats are on board here. And there are more and more politicians getting involved. Democratic states, now even deep blue states, who are now also betting on Bitcoin. And now there's even a Bitcoin legislation getting underway here. And here they want to submit or kickstart a strategic Bitcoin reserve. It also says here that Wyoming will become the 7th state. It's the one that is getting a strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation underway here, so it's also presenting a strategic Bitcoin reserve law again. You always have to mention that when legislation is being introduced. That doesn't mean it's a done deal yet. That's still a long process. Pressure could take a few months to years or something like that in the worst case. But the more pressure is applied, the more the population. The more political pressure there is behind it. The more there are, the easier it is to push something like this through. And overall, there are now 8 states in the US that have this kind of strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation. And that emphasizes just how important this topic is. Also in politics, that emphasizes just how likely a strategic Bitcoin reserve is in 2025. The betting markets keep going up every few days. So the probability is increasing day by day. Hi there. You could almost say that the probability is increasing by the hour. Dennis Peter even goes further. He says that he can confirm. He can confirm that 15 states are currently working on a strategic Bitcoin reserve here. So if we project that onto Germany, then that would mean that almost all federal states in Germany already have a strategic reserve. I mean, just think about it. That's totally insane. In the US, there are obviously a lot more states than there are here in Germany. That's obviously clear. It's a much bigger country and so on. But it just shows how massive Bitcoin is here. Now it's about winning, and he also says that it's just a matter of time until a law like that actually gets passed and implemented. And then states can buy Bitcoin. Then the US can also buy Bitcoin itself. If Donald Trump actually carries out the executive order here, and then we actually have Bitcoin on different levels here. So what's happening at the state level is that the US is building a stockpile, but the different states can also build up their own stockpiles. The crazy thing is that game theory really kicks in here. For example, we see Texas legislator Giovanni Capricciolin, what a funny name, and he says here, I want Texas to be the first to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And it's not just him who wants that, but of course other people too, let's say senators and other political figures who also want to push their state forward. So we basically have a kind of race now. First, it's the race between Donald Trump and all the smaller states, and second, it's the competition among the states themselves. And third, the states against Donald Trump. And now the question is, who will be the first? One here. Who wins the race here? Feel free to drop your suggestions in the comments below. Will Donald Trump or the individual states be the first to implement a reserve strategy here? And if so, which state will it be? And then there was another exciting piece of news. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. The Treasury will begin using extraordinary measures on January 21st. So, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says here, the Treasury will start using extraordinary measures on January 21st. January will start with extraordinary measures here. And now some people are wondering, is this about Bitcoin? They're speculating here. This can't be a coincidence that on the 21st, in January, Donald Trump is basically fresh in office. And then the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the U.S., starts here with extraordinary measures. What could be behind this? Could I possibly visit the Federal Reserve on the 21st, buying Bitcoin in January? But we need to dig a little deeper into this, because in the U.S., there is a debt ceiling. And what we always see, that this debt ceiling gets renewed every 6 months, year or so. That means there's a limit to how much debt the U.S. can take on. But this limit is basically just a number. And this number just keeps getting raised every few months, every year or so. And then the U.S. can take on new debt again. Speculation surrounds January 21st, when the debt limit is forecasted to expire. At that point, the U.S. won't be able to take on new debt as the ceiling will have been reached. January. This debt limit expires, and then the U.S. can't officially take on new debt anymore, because the debt ceiling has been reached. And what happens in the end? Then in the end, you end up accounting fraud, then some strange things are used. It's like how you can still make the numbers look good. So instead of taking on official debt, you just rack up unofficial debt. Or whatever, you use some tricks to basically rack up more debt. Or certain expenses have to be pushed back. So officially, the U.S. is more or less bankrupt, in quotes. Since the ceiling is reached, the U.S. government can't take on any more debt to cover their ongoing costs like pension payments, salaries, and debt repayment. That's why the Treasury has to initiate what's called extraordinary measures. That's basically exactly it. And that means that certain investments or payments will be temporarily halted or postponed to make do with the available resources and to temporarily maintain the government's solvency. So, unfortunately, you have to say no. It's not about that here. That Bitcoin is being bought here, but it's really just about maintaining the Ponzi scheme of the U.S. to keep this going. At some point, the debt limit has to be raised again, and then they can basically go back to massively racking up more debt. It goes on to say that if Congress doesn't raise or suspend the debt ceiling in time, is the government facing a risk of insolvency, a so-called default which would have serious economic consequences. And it won't come to that. It has never come to that in the past. Instead, they've basically always prevented the default by simply continuing to maintain the manipulation or the balance sheet manipulation here. And just like that, they raised the debt ceiling again. What I also found pretty based, that was the argument from a Twitter user who says, In my opinion, Janet Yellen is pulling a Chapter 11 here. So she's basically justifying bankruptcy for the US after she's been in office since 2021. Basically lied in every speech. And now, as the Yellen system and the Biden system are coming to an end, then you basically file for Chapter 11 report. So the bankruptcy, that's obviously a bit exaggerated. There's really no actual bankruptcy here. But you can kind of transfer that idea. Say, I mean, the US has basically been bankrupt for a long time, but the bankruptcy just isn't executed. Because the US can make its own debts. That's basically the fatal part. When you go to work, and I don't know, right? Working may be a better example. If you start a business and you're just not managing it well, then you have to face the consequences for that. That means then, at some point, when you can no longer pay your costs, when you can no longer pay the baker, if you can't pay your electricity bill, first they'll cut off your power, then your phone line, and eventually your internet. Then the repo man might take your TV or other items to settle debts. If you still don't pay, there will be a bankruptcy proceeding. In the US, it's Chapter 11. In Germany, it's personal or company bankruptcy, leading to liquidation. Insolvency helpers manage the process. And what if you end up not doing that and paying off your debts, and what do I know? And if you don't pay the bills, and you also don't settle the internet and electricity stuff and so on, eventually there will be a bankruptcy proceeding. In the US, that would be Chapter 11. In Germany, it would just be personal bankruptcy or official. Company bankruptcy, and then your business gets liquidated. There are even liquidation helpers, insolvency helpers, who handle the whole bankruptcy process. And in the end, what happens is, in the worst case, you could even end up in jail if you act recklessly, or at the very least, you won't have any assets left. You might even have to tap into your personal assets. If you have partnerships, so if you don't have a corporation or anything like that, but if you actually have personal liability. And that's why it's very, very twisted. When other people are basically running entire states, like the US, the largest state in the world. But here, no one has to take responsibility for that. When you're inefficient here, when you're just throwing money around. Here, no one has to go to jail. Here, no one has to take responsibility for that. Here, no one comes to repossess your stuff, saying, hey, come on, let's take your TV. We, as the US, can no longer pay our debts. Everything that happens then is that new debt is issued. New debts are issued to pay off the old debts. And what happens then is that the interest burden keeps rising. Keep going, Peter, keep going. The interest keeps rising when you keep taking on more and more debt. That means you have an ever-increasing interest burden. And at some point, the interest burden gets so high that it becomes the biggest item in the federal budget. By now, the interest burden is higher than the military budget. And that's just the way it is. Crazy. And I'm going to show you guys right now. Asunción in Paraguay at night. So it's a really, really awesome city here. At night, it looks really, really cool. There are a lot of high rises here, a lot of bling bling. Although you have to say it's not really high. High rises, a lot of bling bling. Although you have to say it's not really a high-tech city. That's what I mean. A super modern city. That's what I would say. For South American standards. Pretty okay. But it's not a super modern city like, I don't know, for example, like Dubai or something, or I don't know. In New York or something, there are definitely a lot more high rises. Or maybe Singapore or something like that. There's probably even more blinking at night, but like I said, I'm not really a city fan. That's why I can't really make a big comparison here. For me, cities are always like Bitcoin. That's definitely a very, very mean term. That's obviously completely different. The nozzle just went down there. This is, of course, a stupid comparison, because everyone evaluates it differently. Some people think cities are awesome, while others don't think they're that great. This is definitely what it looks like at night. We definitely don't have to worry. That means if no Bitcoin reserve comes in, then the dollar is going to crash. And if the dollar crashes, then Bitcoin is going to break out. Because Bitcoin is also a solution for the corrupt dollar money system here. And in that sense, I'm signing off here from Paraguay. If you want to buy some Bitcoin, I'll put a link down below for you, where you can easily buy Bitcoin at 21 Bitcoin. The easiest way to buy Bitcoin in Europe. Here's the code for Bitcoin. Up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. See you later. Peace out.